So after 20 years, I have finally played through Tales of Rebirth. But how did I feel about it as a lifelong Tales fan? Well, today, I'm about to tell you just that.
とか言ってたぞ。
お母さん
I've been playing the Tales of series for most of my life. My connection to it begins all the way back when a friend invited me over to try Tales of Eternia on the first PlayStation. We were sitting on the floor, playing co-op, trying to get used to the battle system, and honestly, it was one of those core gaming memories that stuck with me and is actually the whole reason that this channel exists. So returning to Tales of Rebirth, especially now that it has a full playable fan translation, huge thanks to Life Bottle Productions for that, by the way, it brought back a little piece of that time, that era of Tales games where the worlds felt handcrafted, the characters were unique and lovable, and the battle systems were like nothing else. But before we jump into the full review, if you enjoy these kinds of thoughtful JRPG deep dives, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It genuinely helps way more than you might think. And please take a moment to drop in the comments. What is your favorite Tales game and why does it matter to you? Alright, now that we're done with that, let's talk about Tales of Rebirth. Tales of Rebirth begins with Veigue, a quiet young man who has trouble expressing his emotions. His childhood friend Claire is kidnapped, and that becomes the event that pushes him out into the world. At first, it feels familiar. The sort of JRPG setup we all know. The journey begins because someone precious is taken away. But Rebirth does not stay in that storytelling lane for very long. Very quickly, the narrative shifts into something much heavier. A story centered around the conflict between two races. The first being the Huma, who are essentially just regular human beings. And then the Gajuma, a humanoid-like animal being with fur, horns, and other animal traits. But this division of two races isn't just lore, it isn't flavor. It isn't something referenced in a few scenes to add depth, it is the entire driving force of the main plot, repeatedly, constantly, and often very bluntly. The game wants to examine systemic prejudice, how people internalize it, how societies reinforce it, and how violence and hatred spread across generations. That's a meaningful goal, and I respect that the writers took a risk in placing such a difficult subject at the center of the narrative. I want to be honest about my personal experience with it. So the racism between the Huma and the Gajuma, it's intense. NPCs don't just hint at the bias. They speak openly, aggressively, and sometimes they're quite cruel about it. Towns treat members of the other race terribly. There are scenes where it feels like hatred is the default emotional tone of the world. And after a while, that constant aggression wore on me. I do appreciate what the developers were trying to do. Exploring how discrimination shapes identity and relationships is meaningful, especially in a JRPG format where characters learn and change together. But I found the execution leaned more towards repetition and intensity rather than nuance. Instead of the message deepening over time, it often felt like the game kept restating the same emotional point in harsher and harsher ways. And as a player, I felt myself getting exhausted by that atmosphere. Not challenged in a thought-provoking way, just tired of the cruelty of the world. It really kind of made me think of how much this game is similar to what's actually going on in the real world. But the characters themselves are strong individually, and they all play a specific role. So you have your main character Veigue. He is a cold and emotionally restrained young man, and he controls the force of ice. Mao, he's a child about 13 years old, and he's full of innocent optimism, and he has the belief that people can be better, all while controlling the force of flame. Then you have Eugene. He is a big giant cat Gajuma who is a former commander of the Collegian army, and he's seen the consequences of hatred and carries regret because of it. He controls the force of steel. And then you have Tytree. Is it Tytree? Tytree? I'm not sure, but he's my personal favorite. He's basically just your typical worker. He's someone who chooses compassion even when the world doesn't support it. And he's often the butt of many jokes. And he controls the force of wood. And then you have Hilda. She is a Gajuma who experiences discrimination directly. Her pain is often quiet and hidden, but it's always there and you can tell with the way that she acts. She's very blunt. She controls the force of lightning. And then finally, you have Annie. She's a doctor's daughter who despises the Gajuma due to knowing that her father was murdered by one. She begins with prejudice, but slowly she begins to see others clearly. She controls the force of rain. The party is very well written. Their arcs are actually kind of amazing, especially during the Sacred Beast quest in the later half of the game. Their growth feels very honest and true, but the world around them rarely gives them time to breathe. There are a few gentle moments, and there's few places where the warmth of the party members getting to know each other overtakes the hostility. And because of that, I found it very hard to emotionally attach myself to the characters as well as the story. I respect what Tales of Rebirth was trying to do. It was bold and it was thematically serious. It had something very important to talk about, but I didn't enjoy the experience of being inside that world. The message is meaningful, but the delivery often feels too heavy-handed with more emotional force than emotional depth. It made me feel distant from the story instead of connected to it. But anyways, enough of the story, let's talk about the gameplay. When it comes to the gameplay, Tales of Rebirth is where my feelings get a little more complicated. There are parts of it I appreciate on paper, and then there's the reality of how it feels to actually play. Starting with the exploration. The world map is fairly large and it's very colorful. But travel in the PlayStation 2 version is slow. It almost feels like you're walking through a swamp, in towns, in the world map, everywhere. There's no run button originally, so moving through towns or backtracking for side quests is frustrating. The PSP version does add a run function, and that genuinely helps. So if you ever decide to play the game, that version will feel noticeably smoother. But I will mention here, I believe the PSP version is missing instruments in its soundtrack, so it's not as great in that sense. There are plenty of side quests, optional dialogue scenes, skits, and that classic Tales charm of talking to NPCs just to hear their little comments and lives. The world is interesting, I just wish getting around it was a little more fluid. But as far as the battle system is concerned, Rebirth uses the 3-line LMBS, meaning instead of one horizontal plane like all the classic Tales combat, you now have 3 parallel lines that both you and your enemies can move between. In theory, this adds positioning strategy. What line do you want to run up to the enemy on? But in practice, it can make the combat feel very slow and very rigid. Because enemies often change lines frequently, frustratingly enough when you do it so that you cannot run past them, and because your movement between lines isn't as snappy as I'd like, I often ended up getting caught between 2 enemies. And when that happens, it feels almost like my character was the ball in a very mean and very painful game of ping pong. Next, we'll talk about the Force Gauge, the Rush Gauge, and the Force Cube. Rebirth replaces the old TP system with an entirely new battle system. Each art you have equipped does not use TP. Instead, it has its own Force Gauge, which I'll get into in a little bit. The Rush Gauge determines how aggressive or defensive your character's state is, and is how healing is handled in the game. A high Rush Gauge lets you perform level 2 attacks and defend, but you don't heal at all. Meanwhile, if you are in a low Rush Gauge or a cool-off state, it gives your techs a drain feature to heal yourself, but you will not be able to guard attacks. And layer on top of that even is the Force Cube. The Force Cube is a system where each of the 4 directional arts you equip can have a passive bonus attached to it, but those bonuses only activate when the FG or Force Gauge is full, and as you use them, they level up and become more effective. So if you want a damage boost, a larger hitbox, faster recovery frames, a launch ability, or defensive stability on a particular move, you have to trigger that art when the gauge is fully charged. Over time, as you continue to use the move, the bonus effect levels up, so your arts slowly become more specialized. And I will mention, each Force Cube on the corner of the cube has a different ability, so you can rotate that cube to get the perfect match for how you want to play. It does add a little bit of depth. It's an interesting idea, but it does require the player to shape their move habits around meter timing, and it does take a while to feel natural. For me, it didn't quite click in a satisfying way. There was what felt like a lot of waiting involved while I waited for the Force Gauge meters to fill up. And then we have the Smash Point system, which is tied directly to unlocking Ogis or level 2 techs, the stronger follow-up techniques that evolve certain arts. You gain smash points by finishing enemies in specific ways, like ending a combo using a skill instead of a basic attack, or defeating enemies under certain rush gauge conditions, or finishing fights without taking damage. These moments are called technical smashes, and they give you the SP you need to unlock level 2 techs for each art. Again, this is interesting in concept. but in practice, it often meant I was fighting the system instead of the enemy, trying to trigger just the right kind of kill to progress my moveset. It felt a little forced and broke the flow of combat for me. Then we'll start talking about the Mystic Arts. It's a Tales game. Everybody loves Mystic Arts, right? But Mystic Arts in Rebirth work differently than in most Tales games. You can't just fire them off freely once you fill up a overlimit gauge. Instead, there are a lot of conditions that you need to satisfy in order to actually pull them off. Number 1, the battle usually needs to be near the end. The last remaining enemy, especially bosses, must be at low health. There is an internal counter that needs to be full. You don't get to see this counter, it is invisible. You build up this counter by activating your weapon and armor's latent abilities, which are random. They are always performed between 2 characters. So if you're in a fight where it's only 1 versus 1, you cannot use a Mystic Art. And finally, your character has to be in a clean, uninterrupted state to activate it. When everything lines up, you'll see the cue on screen, and all you have to do is press the X button. They look great and they feel great, but because of the setup required, they feel more like a rare finishing flourish than a core part of battle flow. Okay, so my overall thoughts of the combat system is I respect how much went into the combat system. It has a lot of depth, and it's probably one of the most complicated battle systems in the entire Tales series. In fact, before I started this game, I actually went onto YouTube and I went to go look up a guide on how the combat system actually works. This is just a battle system that Tales has never done before, but none of that changed the fact that it didn't feel good to play for me. I don't know if I was missing mechanics and I didn't fully understand it, but it was just frustrating. Switching lines felt sluggish. Getting pinned between enemies was frequent and frustrating. The Force Cube system required constant mental tracking, and earning smash points turned battles into exercises in system wrangling. And the worst part is the game does not have a conventional way to heal. Sure, you have items, but for the most part, healing is all managed by managing your rush gauge instead of standard healing spells. I'll just say it plainly. This is just my opinion, but I think Tales of Rebirth has the least fun combat system in the entire Mothership Tales series. I'm glad I played it, and I did learn a lot from it, and I understand what it was trying to do, but there was never a point where the gameplay felt natural or intuitive to me. But enough of the battle system, let's talk about the music. One of the most emotionally grounding parts of Tales of Rebirth is its soundtrack. Composed by Motoi Sakuraba and Shinji Tamura, 2 composers who have defined the sound of the series for decades. Sakuraba is known for his dramatic, progressive rock-inspired compositions, soaring strings, layered melodies, high-energy battle themes. Meanwhile, Tamura often brings the gentle side, the softer town themes or the subtle character emotion. And you can feel that duality in Tales of Rebirth. The main battle theme, Battle Organization, stands out immediately. It has this driving energy that pushes the player forward without overwhelming them. Mid-game battles introduce variations that ease off on the intensity, matching the slower and more serious tone of the story. But the soundtrack doesn't force the intensity. It just guides you through it and pushes you in the right direction. Then you have those town themes. The town themes are surprisingly warm considering how heavy the themes of the game are. Tamura nailed it. You expect melancholy, and it's there, but it comes through in a more gentle way. Almost like the game is reminding you that, yeah, it's a little bit serious and tensions are high, but the world is still capable of that kindness. There's a village theme that uses soft woodwind textures and a simple repeating melody, and every time I heard it, I just sat and I smiled. It reminded me of the older Tales games I grew up with, where the music made the world feel lived in, not just functional as a JRPG. Then as for the graphics, Tales of Rebirth is very much a mid-2000s JRPG, and it is very apparent by the graphical style. The world map is where the game's age shows most clearly. Characters are represented by small rounded 3D models. They almost look like chess pieces. It's a little goofy, but it's charming, it's not flawed. There's color, and it gives the game a sense of personality. It feels like a world designed to be inviting, even when the story itself is hard to stomach at times. But where the game truly shines is in its 2D sprite animation. Characters animate with subtle little gestures. A hand shift, a weight shift, and a breathing idle stance. It just all feeds into the 2D sprites, and I love it. Spell animations also have that soft, painterly aura effect. Instead of harsh particle flares, it's almost watercolor at times. This is one of those games that makes you miss how great hand-drawn 2D backgrounds are compared to the 3D pre-rendered backgrounds we saw so much going through the ages. Then you have the towns. They have this gentle texture look, soft edges, pastel tones, layered scenery. They don't try to impress you with detail. You can look at a town for a few seconds and understand. What kind of people live here? What is the climate like? Is life here peaceful or is it stressful? It's visual storytelling done through mood and not spectacle. The contrast between the hand-drawn 2D characters and the low-poly 3D world elements gives Tales of Rebirth this nostalgic transitional era charm. It's the exact look of JRPGs evolving between generations, the type of style that just doesn't get made anymore. Not because it couldn't be, but because we have more tech these days, so we don't have to go with that style. But I'm kind of sad that no one approaches games from this angle anymore. But this is what makes Rebirth visually unique, especially now. But as for my overall thoughts, Tales of Rebirth is a very complicated experience. Narratively, it's courageous, it's direct, and it's very serious. Musically, it's absolutely gorgeous. Visually, it captures that little golden window of JRPG history where hand-drawn expression and early 3D ambition coexisted. But the combat system held me back from fully loving the experience. I respected it and I appreciated it, but I just couldn't connect with the battle system. But you know what? That's okay. Not every game needs to be your favorite. Tales of Rebirth is a worthwhile experience, and I'm genuinely grateful that I got the opportunity to finally play it after these 20 years. It's great that the fan translation now lets more people, including myself, feel it for themselves. I would suggest, if you enjoy the Tales series even slightly, Tales of Rebirth is 100% worth playing. However, just know that the story is much more serious than most JRPGs. Tales has always been at that point where they have racism as a part of the story. Tales of Fantasia, Tales of Eternia, Tales of Symphonia, but I will let you know, those are supporting plot lines. In Tales of Rebirth, it is 100% the main plot line, and you will hear about it a lot, and that is why I felt quite uneasy while I was playing it. With that being said, if you enjoyed this review, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It really does help, and I genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Have you played Tales of Rebirth? Did you play in the original Japanese, or did you play it with the Life Bottle Productions translation? Did you like the story, or did you kind of feel the same way I did? And where does it rank among the Tales series for you? Let me know in the comments below. I am really looking forward to know what everybody thought about the game. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me today. This has been Shinky. Thank you for watching, and until the next one, have a wonderful day.